Introduction. Rediscovering George Washington, the man behind the myth. The significance of George Washington in American history. George Washington stands as one of the most iconic figures in the annals of American history. Revered as the father of his country, his image permeates the United States in countless ways, on currency, monuments, towns, and the very capital city that bears his name. His life and legacy occupy a near mythic status, often symbolizing the ideals of leadership, honor, and patriotism. Yet beyond the legend lies a deeply human story, one of ambition, perseverance, contradiction, and transformation, that shaped not only a man but the very nation he helped forge. Washington's importance cannot be overstated. As Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, he led an under-resourced and often discouraged group of colonial militias against the British Empire's world-class military. His ability to inspire, organize, and endure hardship was crucial to the ultimate success of the American Revolution. Following the war, he became the first president of the United States, setting lasting precedents for the role, including voluntarily relinquishing power after 2 terms, a radical act in a world dominated by monarchies and dictatorships. His leadership defined the fledgling republic's early years, striking a delicate balance between authority and liberty, unity and regionalism, power and restraint. Washington embodied the fragile hope of a new nation trying to move beyond colonial subjugation toward self-governance and democracy. His life and career offer invaluable insight into the challenges of nation-building in a volatile era. Ron Chernow's approach and why this biography stands apart. Ron Chernow's Washington. A life represents a monumental achievement in the field of American biography. Spanning over 900 pages, it is the most comprehensive portrait of George Washington to date, meticulously researched, richly detailed, and deeply humanizing. Chernow approaches Washington not as an untouchable hero, but as a complex individual, shaped by his times, his personal ambitions, and his contradictions. What sets Chernow's work apart is his ability to weave together the public and private aspects of Washington's life into a seamless narrative. Drawing on thousands of letters, diaries, and contemporaneous records, including many that were previously overlooked or unpublished, Chernow reconstructs Washington's inner world as well as his public actions. This biography offers a fresh perspective that goes beyond the traditional great man narrative, revealing Washington's insecurities, doubts, flaws, and evolving character alongside his triumphs. Chernow's Washington is neither flawless nor static. He was a man who grew from an ambitious, sometimes impulsive young Virginian into a cautious, calculating leader who understood the immense responsibilities of power. This evolution is central to the biography, as Chernow traces how Washington learned from failures, managed relationships, and navigated the tumultuous political landscape of the 18th century. Furthermore, Chernow does not shy away from the difficult aspects of Washington's legacy, most notably his relationship to slavery. The biography explores how Washington's views and practices evolved over time, reflecting broader tensions in the young republic. Chernow's candid treatment of these contradictions enriches our understanding of Washington as a man of his era, grappling with the moral complexities that would haunt America for generations. Overview of major themes. Several interwoven themes emerge throughout Washington, a life, structuring both Chernow's narrative and the larger historical significance of his subject. 1. Leadership through adversity. Washington's life was defined by his capacity to lead in the face of overwhelming challenges. Whether commanding the Continental Army through brutal winters and military setbacks, or steering a divided young nation through political crises, Washington's leadership was marked by resilience, prudence, and a keen sense of responsibility. Chernow emphasizes that Washington's greatness lay not in flamboyance or charisma, but in his steadiness, judgment, and ability to inspire loyalty and patience among followers. His leadership style was pragmatic and adaptive. Washington understood the limits of his authority and the importance of collaboration, often working behind the scenes to build consensus. His ability to manage powerful personalities, from Alexander Hamilton to Thomas Jefferson, and to navigate factional disputes was critical to maintaining the fragile unity of the new republic. 2. The evolution of character. Chernow presents Washington as a man in continuous development rather than a fixed symbol. Early in his life, Washington was ambitious and somewhat reckless, eager to prove himself on the Virginia frontier and in military campaigns. His experiences during the French and Indian War exposed him to both success and failure, teaching lessons in leadership and humility. As Washington matured, he cultivated self-discipline and a sense of purpose rooted in public service. This evolution was shaped by personal loss, political setbacks, and the daunting task of nation-building. Chernow traces how Washington balanced his private desires, such as his love for his family and Mount Vernon, with public duties, often sacrificing personal happiness for the greater good. This theme of growth resonates beyond biography, reflecting the larger American story of forging identity and purpose amid uncertainty. 3. Power and precedent. Washington's presidency was uncharted territory. As the first president of a republic, he had no rulebook or blueprint. Chernow highlights how Washington carefully crafted the office, setting many of the precedents that still govern the presidency today. From establishing a cabinet system to delivering the first State of the Union address, Washington's actions defined the contours of executive power. A consistent theme in the biography is Washington's commitment to restraint. He was acutely aware of the dangers of concentrated power and sought to embody Republican virtues of moderation and service. His decision to step down after 2 terms was a deliberate act to prevent the emergence of monarchy or dictatorship, reinforcing the principle of peaceful transition of power. Chernow also explores how Washington's leadership shaped the balance between federal authority and states' rights, a foundational tension in American politics that persists to this day. 4. Ambition and restraint. Washington's ambition was a driving force in his life, but it was tempered by an unusual degree of self-control and a sense of duty. Chernow traces this dynamic tension throughout the biography, showing how Washington's desire for honor and legacy was balanced by his commitment to Republican ideals and the public good. This balance was not effortless. Washington grappled with temptations of power and personal pride, yet time and again chose restraint. His ability to subordinate personal ambition to national interests set a standard for future leaders and helped legitimize the presidency. 5. The burden of slavery. One of the most complex and challenging aspects of Washington's legacy is his relationship to slavery. Chernow does not gloss over the contradictions inherent in a man who championed liberty and yet was a significant slaveholder. The biography traces Washington's evolving views on slavery, from acceptance and participation early in life to a gradual discomfort and eventual actions toward emancipation in his will. Chernow situates Washington within the broader context of a society deeply enmeshed in slavery, highlighting the moral and political dilemmas faced by the founding generation. This theme invites readers to wrestle with the imperfect realities of American history and the ongoing struggle to reconcile ideals with practice. 6. Public image and private reality. Washington was a master of image-making and understood the power of reputation. Chernow explores how Washington carefully cultivated a public persona of dignity, humility, and steadfastness. Yet behind this public image was a man with private doubts, insecurities, and emotional depth. The biography draws extensively on Washington's private correspondence, revealing moments of frustration, loneliness, and reflection. This duality between public and private selves enriches our understanding of Washington as a fully realized human being rather than a distant icon. 7. Nation building and the American experiment. Finally, Washington. A life frames Washington's story within the larger experiment of American democracy. Chernow portrays Washington as both a product and a shaper of his time, a man whose leadership was instrumental in transforming revolutionary ideals into functioning institutions. Washington's life encapsulates the hopes and contradictions of the fledgling republic, the tension between liberty and order, individual rights and collective responsibility, idealism and pragmatism. Chernow's biography invites readers to appreciate the complexity and fragility of this experiment, and the enduring significance of Washington's role in it. Conclusion. Chernow, S. Washington. A life is not just a recounting of historical events or a celebration of a national hero. It is a richly textured exploration of a man whose life and leadership helped shape a nation's destiny. By peeling back the layers of myth and legend, Chernow reveals George Washington as a deeply human figure, ambitious yet restrained, flawed yet inspiring, public yet private. This biography challenges us to reconsider our assumptions about Washington and, by extension, about leadership, character, and the American story itself. As we embark on this journey through Washington's life, we encounter a man whose struggles and triumphs continue to resonate, offering timeless lessons for a nation still defining its identity and ideals. Washington's early life, family background, upbringing in Virginia, and early responsibilities. George Washington, the first president of the United States, is often remembered for his leadership during the American Revolution and his statesmanship in the nation's formative years. However, the roots of his legendary character and resilience were forged much earlier, during his formative years in the rolling countryside of colonial Virginia. In this blog, we'll explore the family background and upbringing of young Washington, the early loss that shaped his life, and the responsibilities he shouldered as a boy, elements that would define his journey from a humble planter's son to a revered figure in American history. Family background and colonial Virginia. A prominent lineage, George Washington was born on February 22, 1732, in Westmoreland County, Virginia, at the modest Pope's Creek estate. His family belonged to the Virginia gentry, a class of landowners who, while not aristocrats in the European sense, wielded considerable influence in colonial society. The Washingtons traced their ancestry to England, where their forebears were minor gentry. John Washington, George's great-grandfather, had immigrated to Virginia in the mid-1600s, seeking prosperity in the New World. George's father, Augustine Washington, was a man of ambition and enterprise. Owning several tobacco plantations and engaging in ironworks, Augustine represented the enterprising spirit of colonial Virginia's landed elite. His mother, Mary Ball Washington, came from a similarly respectable background, known for her strength, piety, and resilience, a trait she would pass on to her children. Life in colonial Virginia. The Virginia of Washington's youth was a world of contrasts. On one hand, it offered fertile land and economic opportunity, especially for those like the Washingtons who owned property and enslaved laborers. On the other hand, it was a society defined by a rigid class structure and dependent on transatlantic trade, especially the export of tobacco to England. Plantation life was both privileged and precarious. Wealth was tied to land and labor, and families like the Washingtons had to navigate the ever-present uncertainties of crop yields, market prices, and the threat of disease. Young George grew up in this environment, learning the values of hard work, resourcefulness, and stewardship from an early age. Early upbringing, lessons in character and responsibility, a childhood in transition. George was the eldest child of Augustine's second marriage to Mary Ball. He had 3 older half-siblings from Augustine's first marriage and 5 full siblings, though not all survived to adulthood. His early years were spent at the modest Pope's Creek plantation before the family moved in 1738 to Ferry Farm, across the Rappahannock River from Fredericksburg. Here, George spent much of his childhood, roaming the fields and woods, absorbing the rhythms of rural life. Education and influences. Unlike some of his contemporaries, Washington did not receive a formal education in England. His schooling was local and limited, focused on reading, writing, mathematics, surveying, and basic classics. This was partly due to financial constraints after his father's death, but it also reflected the practical nature of colonial education. What George may have lacked in formal instruction, he made up for with a keen sense of observation and a desire to learn from experience. Washington's upbringing was shaped by his family's social circle, which included prominent planters, merchants, and clergy. He learned the values of honor, duty, and reputation, as well as the practical skills of estate management and gentlemanly conduct. Young George was especially influenced by his older half-brother, Lawrence Washington, who became a surrogate father figure and role model after Augustine's death. Religious and moral foundations. Though the Washington family were members of the Anglican Church, Religion in colonial Virginia was often less about strict doctrine and more about social order and community. Nevertheless, Mary Ball Washington was known for her devoutness and instilled in her children a sense of piety and moral duty. George's later diaries and correspondence reveal a man guided by principles of honesty, fairness, and self-control, qualities that would become hallmarks of his leadership. Early loss and its impact. The death of Augustine Washington. In April 1743, when George was just 11 years old, his father, Augustine, died suddenly. This event was a turning point in the young boy's life. With Augustine's passing, the Washington family's fortunes became more precarious. According to the customs of primogeniture and entail, much of Augustine's property, including the estate at Mount Vernon, went to Lawrence, the eldest son from his first marriage. For George, this meant the loss of both a father and the prospect of a substantial inheritance. Instead, he, his mother, and his siblings faced the challenge of managing a smaller, less prosperous farm at Ferry Farm. Mary Ball Washington, now a widow, was left to supervise the family's affairs, instilling in her children a strong sense of independence and perseverance, the burden of responsibility. Augustine's death thrust George into a role of responsibility far earlier than most boys his age. As the eldest son living at home, he became his mother's chief support, helping manage the farm, oversee the enslaved workers, and handle financial matters. This experience would give him an early education in leadership, discipline, and the weight of command, skills that would serve him throughout his life. Mary Ball Washington's determination to keep her family together and maintain their social standing deeply influenced George. She was known for her sternness and high expectations, and while their relationship was sometimes strained, George never wavered in his respect and sense of duty toward her. Forging a sense of purpose. The early loss of his father also instilled in Washington a sense of ambition and a desire to prove himself. Without the advantages of inheritance or an elite education, he sought other paths to distinction. He developed a passion for surveying, a skill that provided both income and the opportunity to explore the western frontiers of Virginia. At just 16, he was appointed as a county surveyor, a remarkable achievement for someone so young. This early foray into surveying not only helped support his family, but also gave George valuable experience in geography, negotiation, and self-reliance. It also introduced him to influential figures and expanded his horizons beyond the confines of Ferry Farm. The road ahead, from boyhood to leadership. Aspirations and opportunities. George Washington's early life was marked by both privilege and adversity. While his family's status provided certain advantages, the loss of his father and the responsibilities that followed required resilience, adaptability, and determination. These qualities, forged in the crucible of early hardship, would become the foundation of his character. As he grew into young adulthood, Washington continued to seek opportunities for advancement. He aspired to military service, inspired in part by Lawrence's involvement with the Virginia militia and the British Army. These ambitions would soon draw him into the tumultuous world of colonial politics, frontier conflict, and eventually the struggle for American independence. Lessons from the land. Much of what defined Washington, his practicality, his strategic thinking, his sense of duty, can be traced to his upbringing in Virginia. The land itself was both a teacher and a challenge, demanding hard work and offering rewards to those who persevered. Washington's knowledge of the terrain, his skill as a surveyor, and his understanding of the complexities of plantation management would all serve him well in later years. Family ties and lasting influence. Throughout his life, George remained closely connected to his family. His relationships with his mother, siblings, and especially his half-brother Lawrence provided guidance, support, and inspiration. The values instilled in him during these years, honor, integrity, and a sense of public service, became the guiding principles of his adult life. Conclusion: the making of a leader. George Washington's early years in Virginia were formative in every sense. From the legacy of his family to the trials of early loss and the weight of responsibility, each experience contributed to the development of a man who would one day lead a nation. The challenges he faced as a boy demanded maturity, perseverance, and vision, traits that would define his leadership during America's most critical moments. Understanding Washington's early life helps us appreciate the roots of his greatness. Before he became a general or a president, he was a boy navigating the complexities of colonial Virginia, shaped by family, circumstance, and the land itself. In the story of his youth, we find the seeds of the character that would make him first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. The Surveyor and the Soldier. Washington's early career and the crucible of war. George Washington's journey from an ambitious young Virginian to the revered leader of a revolutionary nation did not begin on the battlefield, but in the forests and fields of colonial America. His early work as a surveyor opened doors to opportunity and self-reliance, while his military service during the French and Indian War forged his leadership through adversity and failure. These formative experiences shaped Washington's ambitions, resilience, and vision, qualities that would later define his role as the architect of American independence. Washington's early career as a surveyor, a young man of the land. After the death of his father, George Washington's prospects were limited by the traditions of inheritance and the realities of colonial Virginia. Lacking the wealth or formal education of many peers, Washington turned to practical skills. Surveying, a respected and lucrative profession, became his entry into adulthood. At just 16 years old, Washington joined a surveying party sent by Lord Fairfax, a wealthy landowner and family ally, to chart the wild lands of the Shenandoah Valley. The experience was demanding and dangerous. Washington spent weeks in the wilderness, traversing forests, rivers, and mountains, often in harsh weather and among unfamiliar peoples, gaining skills and confidence. Surveying required precision, endurance, and negotiation. Washington learned to read the land, measure boundaries, and interact with settlers, Native Americans, and colonial authorities. His surveys helped open new territories for settlement and speculation, and by age 17, he was appointed surveyor of Culpeper County, an impressive achievement for someone so young. This work brought Washington both income and respect. More importantly, it fostered self-reliance, adaptability, and a deep knowledge of the Virginia frontier, traits that would serve him well as a military leader and statesman. The French and Indian War, formative experiences and ambitions. A call to arms. By the early 1750s, the rival claims of Britain and France over North American territory brought the colonies to the brink of war. The Virginia governor sought to assert British interests in the Ohio Valley, and the ambitious 21-year-old Washington, already a leader in his community, was chosen as an emissary to the French. In late 1753, Washington undertook a perilous winter journey through the wilds of western Pennsylvania to deliver a message to the French demanding their withdrawal. Though the mission failed diplomatically, it showcased his courage, composure, and ability to operate in high-stakes situations. The battle at Fort Necessity. Washington's first real military command came in 1754, leading Virginia militia to build a fort, later called Fort Necessity. The encounter with French and Native American forces ended in disaster. Outnumbered, poorly supplied, and inexperienced, Washington and his men were forced to surrender. Though the defeat was humiliating, it was also educational. Washington gained first-hand experience of the challenges of leadership, logistics, and diplomacy in the field. He learned the importance of preparation, discipline, and realistic assessment, lessons sometimes learned only through adversity. Braddock's defeat and leadership in crisis. In 1755, Washington joined British General Edward Braddock's expedition to capture Fort Duquesne, now Pittsburgh. The campaign ended in a devastating ambush. Braddock was killed, and the British troops were routed. Amid chaos, Washington distinguished himself by organizing a retreat, rallying survivors, and displaying remarkable composure under fire. His bravery and resourcefulness won him public acclaim and a reputation as a rising colonial leader. Yet he also witnessed the flaws of British military arrogance and the complexities of frontier warfare, insights that would inform his later command in the Revolutionary War. Ambitions and frustrations. Despite his growing reputation, Washington's ambitions were often frustrated. The British Army refused regular commissions to colonial officers, and political infighting in Virginia limited his authority and resources. Washington resigned his commission in 1758, disillusioned but wiser, learning from failure and adversity resilience in the face of setbacks. Washington's early military career was marked by setbacks: defeat at Fort Necessity, wounds in battle, bureaucratic snubs, and the harsh realities of frontier conflict. Yet, rather than embitter him, these experiences deepened his resilience and self-discipline. He learned to adapt to changing circumstances, to listen to advice, and to temper ambition with prudence. His failures taught him humility, but also reinforced his determination to serve and lead. The lessons of adversity would become vital in the far greater trials ahead. A broader vision. Through his surveying and military service, Washington gained a breadth of experience rare among colonial Virginians. He came to understand the land, the people, and the political complexities of the colonies. He developed a network of influential connections, a reputation for integrity, and a sense of responsibility that extended beyond his own interests. Conclusion. Foundations for greatness. The years Washington spent as a surveyor and soldier were foundational. They provided him with practical skills, confidence, and a deep understanding of America's landscape and people. The crucible of failure and adversity forged his character, teaching him to lead with both resolve and humility. These early experiences did not guarantee Washington's future greatness, but they prepared him for it. When the call for independence came, he was ready, not just as a military commander, but as a leader who understood the land, the people, and the hard lessons required to shape a nation. The planter and Virginia gentleman, George Washington's identity as a planter and Virginia gentleman, was pivotal in shaping both his personal ambitions and his public legacy. Through the building of Mount Vernon, his pursuit of social standing, and his participation in the plantation economy, including the institution of slavery, Washington's life reflected the complexities and contradictions of colonial Virginia's elite. Building Mount Vernon, a symbol of status and achievement. Mount Vernon, Washington's iconic estate overlooking the Potomac River, began as a modest farmhouse inherited from his half-brother Lawrence. Over decades, Washington expanded and transformed it into one of the most celebrated homes in America. His attention to architectural detail, innovative agricultural practices, and landscape design reflected both his aesthetic sensibilities and practical ambitions. Innovation and stewardship. Washington was a progressive farmer for his era. He experimented with crop rotation, improved livestock, and diversified Mount Vernon's operations beyond tobacco to include wheat, fishing, and milling. These efforts made the estate not only a symbol of wealth, but also a model of agricultural advancement. Washington's management style combined hands-on oversight with Enlightenment ideas about improvement and efficiency. Social standing and ambition. The Virginia gentry. In colonial Virginia, land ownership was the foundation of social status. As Washington acquired more property and developed Mount Vernon, he became firmly entrenched in the gentry class. This position brought privileges, political influence, access to elite social circles, and the respect of peers. Washington's marriage to Martha Custis, one of the wealthiest widows in Virginia, further elevated his status and extended his network. Public service and reputation. Washington's ambition was not purely material. He sought to embody the ideals of the Virginia gentleman: honor, civility, leadership, and public service. He served in the Virginia House of Burgesses, attended Anglican church services, and hosted influential guests at Mount Vernon. His reputation for integrity, hospitality, and industry became as important to him as his wealth. Slavery and the plantation economy. The harsh reality. Washington's success as a planter was inseparable from the labor of enslaved people. Like most Virginia planters, he relied on enslaved Africans and African Americans to build, maintain, and operate Mount Vernon. The plantation's prosperity and Washington's genteel lifestyle depended on their forced labor. By the time of his death, more than 300 enslaved individuals lived and worked at Mount Vernon, performing grueling labor in the fields, workshops, and main house. Washington managed this system with the same diligence he applied to farming, But he was also increasingly troubled by slavery's moral and practical contradictions. Evolving views. Although Washington remained a slaveholder for most of his life, his views on slavery evolved over time. He privately expressed discomfort with the institution and, unlike many of his contemporaries, made provisions in his will for the emancipation of his enslaved workers after his and Martha's deaths. Nevertheless, his wealth and status were built on a system that denied freedom and dignity to others, a contradiction that remains central to his legacy. Conclusion: complexity and contradiction. As a planter and Virginia gentleman, George Washington embodied the aspirations and contradictions of his age. He built Mount Vernon into a testament to his ambition and skill, achieved prominence in society, and contributed to agricultural innovation. Yet his life was also deeply entwined with slavery and the inequalities of the plantation economy. Understanding Washington as both a product and shaper of his environment is essential to appreciating the full scope of his achievements and the enduring questions they raise. Courtship and marriage. A union of heart and fortune. George Washington's courtship of Martha Custis was both a personal and practical milestone. Martha Dandridge Custis, a wealthy widow with 2 young children, was one of the most eligible women in Virginia. The two met in early 1759, and their relationship quickly blossomed. Washington, then a rising young officer, was drawn to Martha's charm, intelligence, and substantial inheritance. Their marriage, celebrated on January 6, 1759, was a partnership built on mutual respect and affection, but it also significantly boosted Washington's social standing and wealth. Blending families. By marrying Martha, Washington became stepfather to her children, John, Jackie, and Martha, Patsy. Though George and Martha had no children together, likely due to George's infertility, their home was filled with extended family, friends, and wards. Washington grew deeply attached to his stepchildren, though both would tragically die young. Patsy from epilepsy and Jackie from illness during the Revolutionary War. Relationship with Martha Custis. A loyal and supportive partnership. The Washingtons' marriage was marked by deep companionship and mutual support. Martha managed Mount Vernon in George's frequent absences and was an adept hostess, cementing the estate's reputation for hospitality. During the Revolutionary War, Martha famously joined her husband at winter encampments, providing comfort and stability to Washington and his officers. Private affection, public reserve. Though both were reserved in expressing emotions publicly, surviving letters reveal a quiet tenderness. When separated, George wrote to Martha with warmth and concern, and Martha preserved his letters, indicating their importance to her. Their partnership was not only personal but also political. Together, they navigated the demands of public life and private duty. Personal life and family. Life at Mount Vernon. The Washingtons' home was the center of a large, bustling household. Extended family, friends, enslaved workers, and visitors from all walks of life made Mount Vernon a lively and sometimes chaotic place. Martha, known for her graciousness, oversaw domestic affairs, while George balanced plantation management with his public responsibilities. Family challenges and legacy. Despite outward appearances, the Washingtons faced many personal losses. The deaths of Martha's children, the pressures of public life, and the constant demands of running a large estate. Yet their enduring partnership provided both comfort and strength. After George's death, Martha continued to manage Mount Vernon and preserve his legacy, earning respect in her own right as the nation's First Lady. In summary, George and Martha Washington's marriage was a blend of affection, partnership, and shared responsibility. Their relationship shaped not just their own lives, but also the social and political fabric of early America, leaving a legacy of resilience, duty, and grace. The road to revolution, political awakening, and the colonial crisis, Washington's role in Virginia politics, and tensions with Britain. 1. Political awakening and the colonial crisis. The broader context. The period following the French and Indian War, 1754-1763, marked a dramatic shift in the relationship between Britain and its American colonies. Britain, burdened by war debt and the costs of administering its expanded empire, sought to raise revenue through a series of new taxes and regulations. These included the Sugar Act, 1764, Stamp Act, 1765, Townshend Acts, 1767, and the Tea Act, 1773. The British also increased their military presence in the colonies and restricted westward expansion through the Proclamation of 1763. Key sources of tension taxation. Without representation, colonists objected to being taxed by a parliament in which they had no elected representatives, rejecting the British notion of virtual representation and insisting that only their own assemblies could levy taxes. Standing army and quartering. The Quartering Act required colonists to house and supply British troops, which was widely resented as an infringement on colonial liberties. Trade restrictions and enforcement, crackdowns on smuggling, and the establishment of new customs boards angered merchants and colonists alike. Punitive measures. British responses to resistance, such as dissolving colonial assemblies and passing the intolerable acts after the Boston Tea Party, were seen as direct attacks on self-government. These policies led to widespread protests, boycotts, and eventually violent confrontations, such as the Boston Massacre, 1770, and the Boston Tea Party, 1773. The colonial response was not just about economics, but about the perceived erosion of traditional rights and self-government. 2. Washington's role in Virginia politics, entry into politics. After his military service in the French and Indian War, George Washington returned to civilian life and, in 1758, was elected to the Virginia House of Burgesses, the first elected legislative assembly in the American colonies. He served continuously until 1775, representing first Frederick County and later Fairfax County. Washington's election was aided by his local prominence, family connections, and the traditional practice of providing food and drink to voter service in the House of Burgesses. Washington was not known for fiery oratory, but was respected for his diligence, reliability, and commitment to public service. He focused on issues affecting Virginia planters, such as land rights, westward expansion, and the economic challenges posed by British mercantile policies. His experience as a landowner and planter, as well as his military background, informed his positions on these issues. Political stance and reputation. Washington's political reputation in the House of Burgesses was that of a moderate but principled leader. He was deeply concerned with the growing tensions between the colonies and Britain, particularly as Parliament imposed new taxes and regulations. While not a leading radical, Washington supported collective colonial action and resistance to what he and many others saw as violations of colonial rights. Leadership in resistance. Washington played a key role in organizing and enforcing non-importation agreements in Virginia, which aimed to pressure British merchants and Parliament by boycotting British goods. In 1769, he introduced a proposal, drafted by George Mason, in the House of Burgesses calling for a boycott of British goods until the Townshend Acts were repealed. When the intolerable acts were passed in 1774, Washington chaired the meeting that adopted the Fairfax Resolves, a set of resolutions that called for a Continental Congress and outlined a plan for unified colonial resistance significance. Washington's years in the House of Burgesses were formative, providing him with political networking opportunities, leadership development, and experience in colonial resistance. These experiences laid the groundwork for his later roles in the Continental Congress, the Revolutionary War, and ultimately the presidency. 3. Tensions with Britain and Washington's position. Opposition to British taxation policies. Washington's responses to British taxation policies, such as the Stamp Act and Townshend Acts, were characterized by strong opposition. He considered these acts unconstitutional and a threat to colonial liberties. As a member of the House of Burgesses, he supported resolutions condemning these acts and participated in boycotts of British goods' broader colonial resistance. Washington's stance was representative of a growing consensus among colonial elites and ordinary citizens. He supported collective action, such as boycotts and the formation of committees of correspondence, to coordinate resistance across the colonies. His leadership in Virginia helped set the stage for broader intercolonial cooperation, culminating in the First Continental Congress in 1774, participation in early revolutionary activities. Washington's leadership extended beyond economic boycotts. He was a delegate to the First Continental Congress in 1774, where he worked to build consensus among the colonies and supported measures for collective action. He also helped train local militias in Virginia and organized the enforcement of the boycott of British goods. Summary of Washington's position. Washington was a vocal critic of British policies, actively participated in resistance efforts, and helped articulate the colonial position that only their own elected assemblies had the legitimate authority to tax and govern them. His actions and views during this period positioned him as a key leader in the movement that would ultimately lead to revolution. Conclusion. The road to revolution was marked by a political awakening in the American colonies, driven by escalating tensions with Britain over issues of taxation, representation, and self-government. George Washington's role in Virginia politics, especially his service in the House of Burgesses and leadership in resistance movements, was crucial in shaping both his own political philosophy and the broader colonial response. His principled opposition to British overreach, organizational skills, and ability to unify disparate colonial interests made him a central figure in the colonial crisis and the eventual struggle for independence. Commander-in-Chief. George Washington and the Revolutionary War. This comprehensive overview examines George Washington's role as Commander-in-Chief during the American Revolutionary War, focusing on his appointment and initial challenges, leadership style and strategic vision, the hardships of war, especially Valley Forge and morale, major campaigns and battles, relationships with officers and foreign allies, and the end of the war with the challenge of demobilization. 1. Appointment and initial challenges. Appointment as Commander-in-Chief. Context. In the spring of 1775, as hostilities erupted at Lexington and Concord, the Second Continental Congress recognized the need for unified military leadership. John Adams and others advocated for a Virginian commander to ensure broad colonial support, and George Washington, a respected Virginian with prior military experience, was the clear choice. Selection. On June 15, 1775, Congress unanimously appointed Washington as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. Washington accepted with humility, expressing doubts about his abilities but pledging to serve the cause. Initial challenges. Upon taking command, Washington faced daunting obstacles, disunity, and lack of discipline. The army was a patchwork of militias from different colonies, each with its own customs and leadership. Soldiers often saw themselves as volunteers, not professional soldiers, making discipline difficult. Supply shortages. Chronic shortages of food, clothing, ammunition, and other essentials plagued the army. Congress, lacking taxation power, struggled to provide adequate resources. Inexperienced officers and troops. Many officers were chosen by local governments or by the men themselves, leading to inconsistent standards. The troops were largely untrained and unaccustomed to military discipline. Uncertain authority. Washington had to balance his authority with the independence of the states and the oversight of Congress, always mindful of maintaining civilian control over the military personal doubts. Washington was acutely aware of the burden of command and the possibility of failure, expressing deep personal anxiety in private correspondence. 2. Leadership style and strategic vision. Military background. Washington's earlier service in the French and Indian War provided valuable lessons in adaptability, logistics, and the importance of maintaining discipline and morale under adverse conditions. Leadership style adaptability. Washington learned from early defeats and shifted from seeking decisive victories to a more flexible, Fabian strategy, avoiding large-scale confrontations that could destroy his army, while striking opportunistically. Personal example. He led by example, sharing hardships with his troops and demonstrating resilience and integrity, which inspired loyalty, humility, and collaboration. Washington surrounded himself with talented officers and was open to their input, delegating authority and strengthening his command, ethical leadership. He consistently placed the cause of independence above personal ambition, most famously when he refused suggestions to become a monarch or dictator, and later when he resigned his commission to Congress' strategic vision. Preserve the Army. Washington's primary goal was to keep the Continental Army intact and in the field, recognizing that survival was more important than winning every battle. Fabian strategy. He adopted a strategy of strategic retreat and selective engagement, leveraging the vast geography of the colonies to stretch British resources, calculated risks. Washington was willing to take bold actions when necessary, such as the surprise attacks at Trenton and Princeton, which revived alliances and morale. He understood the importance of alliances, especially with France, and worked to maintain the support of Congress and the civilian population. The hardships of war, Valley Forge and morale, Valley Forge encampment, 1777-1778. Conditions. The winter at Valley Forge was marked by severe shortages of food, clothing, and shelter. Nearly 2,900 men were unfit for duty due to lack of clothing, and soldiers left bloody footprints in the snow, disease, and death. Crowded, unsanitary conditions led to outbreaks of typhus, dysentery, and influenza. Nearly 2,000 soldiers died, mostly from disease. Morale, the combination of military defeats and harsh conditions, led to low morale and fears of mutiny or mass desertion. Washington's response. Personal example, Washington remained with his troops, sharing their hardships and demonstrating resilience. Supply reforms. He lobbied Congress and reorganized the supply system, appointing Nathaniel Greene as Quartermaster General, which improved conditions, training, and organization. Washington welcomed Baron von Steuben, who implemented rigorous training and standardized drills, transforming the Army into a disciplined force. Sanitation and health. New standards of camp hygiene helped reduce disease, unity, and purpose. Washington's leadership and the shared hardships fostered camaraderie and commitment. News of the French alliance in May 1778 further boosted morale significance. Valley Forge became a symbol of endurance and transformation, with Washington's leadership crucial in holding the Army together and preparing it for future successes. 4. Major campaigns and battles. Key campaigns and battles. Campaign battle date as outcome significant siege of Boston, 1775-1776. British evacuation. American morale boost. New York campaign, 1776. Series of defeats. Skillful retreats by Washington, Trenton, and Princeton. Deck 1776, Jan 1777. American victories. Revived revolutionary cause. Philadelphia campaign, 1777-1778. British occupation. Valley Forge, Winter, Saratoga, 1777. American victory. French alliance secured Monmouth, 1778. Tactical draw. Improved American Army performance. Yorktown, 1781. Decisive American-French victory. War's end. Export as CSV highlights Siege of Boston, 1775-1776. Washington's first major command, culminating in the British evacuation of Boston. New York and New Jersey campaigns, 1776-1777. Despite defeats, Washington's leadership preserved the Army through strategic retreats, Trenton and Princeton, Winter, 1776-1777. Bold surprise attacks that revived American morale and the revolutionary cause. Philadelphia campaign, 1777-1778. Despite losing Philadelphia, the Army's transformation at Valley Forge was pivotal. Saratoga, 1777. Though not directly under Washington, this victory secured French support. A turning point in the war. Monmouth, 1778, demonstrated the improved discipline and effectiveness of the Continental Army. Yorktown, 1781. In coordination with French forces, Washington besieged Cornwallis, leading to the British surrender and the effective end of the war. 5. Relationships with officers and foreign allies. With his officers' loyalty and respect, Washington inspired loyalty and respect among his officers, fostering unity and discipline. He managed a diverse group, balancing strong personalities and mediating disputes. Key figures. He developed close relationships with officers like Henry Knox and the Marquis de Lafayette, the latter becoming almost like a son to him. Foreign officers such as Baron von Steuben played crucial roles in training and organization with the Continental Congress complex relationship. Washington's relationship with Congress was sometimes strained due to chronic shortages and political interference. Nevertheless, he maintained a respectful, deferential attitude, setting a precedent for civilian control of the military resignation. His willingness to resign his commission at the end of the war was a powerful demonstration of his commitment to Republican principles with foreign allies. France. The alliance with France was vital. Washington worked closely with French officers, especially Lafayette and General Rochambeau, whose cooperation was crucial at Yorktown. Other foreign officers. Washington integrated expertise from Baron von Steuben, Prussia, Thaddeus Kosciuszko, and Casimir Pulaski, Poland, enhancing the Army's effectiveness. The end of the war and the challenge of demobilization, final stages and the Treaty of Paris, winding down. By 1783, major fighting had ceased, and the Army was encamped at Newburgh, New York, awaiting the outcome of peace negotiations. Treaty of Paris, signed on September 3, 1783, the treaty recognized American independence and established national borders. Demobilization and the Newburgh Conspiracy. Discontent. Many officers and soldiers had not been paid, leading to fears of mutiny or a military coup. The Newburgh Conspiracy. Washington's intervention. In March 1783, Washington diffused the crisis with a powerful address, appealing to his officers' sense of duty and honor, and reaffirming civilian control over the military resolution. Congress granted officers a lump sum payment, and the Army was gradually demobilized. Washington's resignation of his commission further cemented the principle of civilian supremacy. Significance. Washington's steady leadership during demobilization preserved the fragile new government and set a lasting precedent for the relationship between the military and civil authority in the United States. Conclusion. George Washington's tenure as Commander-in-Chief was defined by his ability to overcome immense challenges, disunity, supply shortages, military defeats, and political intrigue, through adaptability, personal integrity, and a strategic vision focused on preserving the Army and the revolutionary cause. His leadership at Valley Forge, his management of key relationships, and his handling of the war as end and demobilization were instrumental in securing American independence and establishing foundational principles for the new nation. The reluctant statesman, Washington and the birth of the American presidency. The Constitutional Convention, Washington's role. Presiding over the convention. After the Revolutionary War, George Washington hoped to retire from public life, but his reputation for integrity and leadership made him the unanimous choice to preside over the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, 1787. Role. Washington did not speak often during the debates but provided legitimacy and unity to the proceedings. His presence reassured delegates and the public that the new government would be trustworthy and not devolve into tyranny or chaos. Outcome. The Constitution established a stronger federal government, with the office of the presidency shaped in part by the delegates' trust in Washington's character. Washington's presidency, balancing power and precedent, reluctant acceptance. Washington was unanimously elected as the first president of the United States, 1789. He accepted out of a sense of duty, not ambition, and continually expressed reluctance for the office. Balancing power. Defining the role. With no clear blueprint, Washington set precedents for how the executive branch should function, respecting Congress's authority but also asserting presidential powers where appropriate. Dignity, not monarchy. He rejected titles that suggested royalty, preferring Mr. President, and established rituals and boundaries to maintain both the dignity and republican nature of the office. Two-term precedent. By stepping down after 2 terms, he established an informal limit on presidential tenure that stood until the 22nd Amendment. Cabinet battles. Hamilton, Jefferson, and political divisions. Creating the cabinet. Washington assembled a diverse group of advisors. Alexander Hamilton, Treasury, advocated for a strong central government, national bank, and close ties with Britain. Thomas Jefferson, State, favored states' rights, agrarianism, and sympathized with revolutionary France. Henry Knox, War, and Edmund Randolph, Attorney General, rounded out the original cabinet. Ideological clashes. Hamilton versus Jefferson. Their conflicting visions led to fierce debates over policy, especially on the economy, foreign policy, and the scope of federal power. Washington's leadership. He encouraged debate but ultimately made decisions himself, striving for consensus but not shying away from difficult choices, e.g., supporting Hamilton's financial plans while warning against partisan divisions. Legacy, setting the tone for the Republic. Washington's presidency was a masterclass in statesmanship. By balancing power, establishing precedents, and navigating cabinet rivalries, He helped define the American presidency and ensured the stability of the fledgling republic. The presidency of George Washington. Defining the office, precedents, and innovations. When George Washington took the oath of office on April 30, 1789, in New York City, he faced the unprecedented challenge of shaping the presidency itself. There was no clear blueprint for the daily activities, powers, or public image of the president. Washington established crucial precedents, including forming a cabinet. He created a group of advisors, including Hamilton, Jefferson, Knox, and Randolph, setting the model for future presidents. Two-term limit. By voluntarily stepping down after 2 terms, he established the tradition of presidential term limits. Presidential conduct. Washington set the tone for how presidents should interact with Congress, the public, and foreign dignitaries, balancing dignity with Republican simplicity, domestic policies, and challenges. Washington's administration faced significant domestic challenges. Judiciary Act of 1789 established the federal court system, including the Supreme Court, district, and circuit courts, laying the foundation for the American Judiciary Northwest Indian War. Washington directed military campaigns to assert U.S. control over the Northwest Territory, leading to eventual treaties with Native American tribes. Economic policy. Under Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton, the administration implemented policies to stabilize the national economy, including federal assumption of state debts and the creation of the Bank of the United States. Foreign affairs, neutrality, treaties, and crises. Washington's foreign policy was guided by a desire to protect American independence and avoid entanglement in European conflicts. Neutrality Proclamation, 1793, declared the U.S. neutral in the conflict between Britain and France, setting a precedent for American foreign policy. Jay Treaty, 1794, sought to resolve lingering issues with Britain from the Revolutionary War, averting war and facilitating 10 years of peaceful trade. Pinckney's Treaty, 1795, negotiated with Spain, securing navigation rights on the Mississippi River and access to New Orleans for American commerce. Handling foreign intrigue. Washington managed crises such as the Jeannette Affair, where a French envoy tried to draw the U.S. into European wars. The Whiskey Rebellion and federal power. The Whiskey Rebellion, 1794, was a major test of federal authority. Western Pennsylvania farmers violently protested a federal excise tax on whiskey. Washington responded by personally leading federalized troops to suppress the rebellion, demonstrating the federal government's willingness and ability to enforce its laws. This action affirmed the power of the new government and set a precedent for dealing with domestic unrest. Washington's style of leadership. Washington's leadership was marked by reluctance and duty. He accepted the presidency out of a sense of obligation, not ambition, and was acutely aware of the precedents he was setting. Consultation and delegation. He valued advice from his cabinet, encouraged debate, and made final decisions himself. Dignity and restraint. Washington maintained a careful balance between authority and humility, avoiding any appearance of monarchy or personal aggrandizement. Commitment to unity. He consistently sought to unify the nation, warning against political parties and sectionalism in his farewell address. In summary, Washington's presidency defined the office through innovation and precedent, navigated domestic and foreign challenges with prudence, asserted federal authority during crises like the Whiskey Rebellion, and set a standard for presidential leadership that endures to this day. The farewell decision to step down. George Washington's decision to step down after 2 terms as president was a defining moment in American history. At a time when some expected him to serve for life, or even become a monarch, Washington chose to relinquish power voluntarily. This act established a precedent for the peaceful transfer of executive authority and reinforced the principle that the presidency was a temporary trust, not a lifetime appointment. His humility and commitment to Republican ideals set a standard for future leaders, emphasizing service over personal ambition. The farewell address and its legacy. Washington's farewell address, published in September 1796, remains one of the most significant documents in American political history. Rather than delivering it as a public speech, Washington wrote a letter to the nation, offering wisdom and warnings as he prepared to retire. Key points from the farewell address include: unity above faction. Washington warned against the dangers of political parties and regional divisions, urging Americans to see themselves as one united people. Caution in foreign affairs. He advised the young nation to avoid permanent alliances with foreign countries, promoting independence in international relations while encouraging fair trade. Importance of morality and education. Washington stressed the need for virtue and knowledge as the foundations of a successful republic. Respect for the Constitution. He emphasized adherence to the Constitution and the rule of law. Legacy. Washington's farewell address has been cited by generations of leaders as a guiding document. Its counsel on unity, moderation, and foreign policy neutrality shaped American political culture and remains relevant in debates about partisanship and America's role in the world. The address is still read annually in the U.S. Senate, a testament to its lasting influence on the nation's identity and governance. Retirement and legacy life at Mount Vernon post-presidency. After leaving the presidency in 1797, George Washington returned to his beloved estate, Mount Vernon, in Virginia. He resumed the life of a gentleman farmer, overseeing the management of his lands, crops, and livestock. Washington devoted himself to agricultural innovation and the improvement of his property, corresponding with fellow farmers and experimenting with crop rotation and new farming techniques. He also welcomed a steady stream of visitors, friends, and former colleagues who sought his advice and company. Though officially retired from public life, Washington's reputation ensured he remained a figure of national importance, often consulted on matters of state and national crisis. Washington's evolving views on slavery. Washington's relationship to slavery was complex and changed over time. As a young man, he inherited enslaved people and relied on their labor at Mount Vernon. However, during and after the Revolutionary War, his attitudes began to shift. Influenced by Enlightenment ideals and the struggle for liberty, Washington grew increasingly uneasy with the institution of slavery. Actions in life. As president, Washington adhered to laws protecting slavery, but took steps to avoid breaking up enslaved families and quietly supported gradual abolition in private conversation. His will, in a remarkable act for his era, Washington's will provided for the emancipation of all the enslaved people he personally owned after Martha Washington's death. He was the only founding father to free all his slaves in his will, marking a significant, though limited, break from prevailing norms. Death and the making of a national icon. Washington died at Mount Vernon on December 14, 1799, following a brief illness. His passing was mourned deeply across the United States and around the world. Eulogies extolled his character, leadership, and dedication to the fledgling nation. Immediate legacy. Public memorials, processions, and tributes honored his life and accomplishments. Congress commissioned Henry Lighthorse Harry Lee to deliver a famous eulogy, calling Washington first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. National icon. In the decades that followed, Washington's image became synonymous with American ideals of leadership, civic virtue, and humility. His face appeared on currency, statues, and in countless works of art. Enduring influence. Washington's precedents, particularly his voluntary relinquishing of power and his counsel in the farewell address, continue to shape American political culture. He remains a symbol of unity, Republican values, and the ongoing struggle to live up to the nation's founding principles. Chernow's interpretive lens on George Washington. Ron Chernow's Washington. A Life is widely acclaimed for its fresh, psychologically rich, and deeply researched portrait of America's first president. Chernow's interpretive lens is distinguished by his focus on Washington's inner life, his willingness to confront flaws and contradictions, and his use of newly available sources and perspectives. Below is a comprehensive analysis of these aspects. 1. Analysis of Washington's character, ambition, restraint, and stoicism. Ambition. Chernow dispels the myth of Washington as a purely selfless public servant, instead presenting him as a man of considerable ambition, especially in his youth. Washington Ichi's early military career during the French and Indian War is depicted as motivated by a desire for social advancement and recognition. Chernow notes that Washington really wanted a commission in the British Army and aspired to join the ranks of the British elite. Had he achieved this, Chernow speculates, Washington might have ended up suppressing the American Revolution rather than leading it. Washington's social climbing is further illustrated by his efforts to become a gentleman and his longing to visit England, as well as his strategic marriage to Martha Custis, which solidified his place among the Virginia gentry. After the Revolutionary War, Washington's meticulous gathering and cataloging of his correspondence is interpreted by Chernow as evidence of his growing interest in his legacy and how history would remember him. Restraint. Chernow's Washington is a man who learns, often painfully, the value of restraint, both in his personal conduct and in wielding power. As president, Washington was acutely aware that every action set a precedent, requiring constant self-restraint, especially given the lack of clear guidelines for the new office. Despite his popularity and the fears of some that he might become a monarch, Washington repeatedly resisted opportunities to seize more power than was constitutionally granted, a principled refusal that Chernow emphasizes as crucial in shaping the presidency and the republic. On a personal level, Chernow highlights Washington's restraint in his relationship with his mother, Mary Ball Washington. Despite her lack of affection and public complaints about him, Washington remained dutiful and never publicly criticized her, even when it caused him embarrassment. Stoicism. Chernow both affirms and complicates the traditional image of Washington as a stoic. While Washington's reputation for being an undemonstrative, granite-faced stoic is described as slightly exaggerated, but not completely undeserved, Chernow reveals that beneath the stoic exterior was a man of intense feeling hidden behind a carefully maintained facade. Washington's lack of formal education contributed to his emotional reserve, as he felt inferior to his more classically educated peers and thus adopted a reserved demeanor. Chernow's biography is praised for showing Washington's vulnerabilities, his insecurities about education, his financial anxieties, and his struggles with the burdens of leadership. These humanizing details make his stoicism appear as a conscious choice rather than an innate trait. Washington's flaws and contradictions. Slavery. Chernow devotes significant attention to Washington's evolving, often contradictory stance on slavery. He presents Washington as a man who, while deeply enmeshed in the slave-holding society of Virginia and personally benefiting from enslaved labor, grew increasingly uncomfortable with the institution as he aged. Chernow does not shy away from the fact that Washington's wealth, status, and lifestyle were built on the backs of enslaved people, and that he was a strict taskmaster. Washington's efforts to treat his slaves fairly and humanely by the standards of his time, refusing to break up families, rewarding loyalty, and providing for their health, are acknowledged. But Chernow is clear that these actions do not absolve him of complicity in the system. Washington's attempts to phase out slavery legislatively were half-hearted and ultimately abandoned when he realized it would threaten the fragile union of the new nation. Chernow gives weight to Washington's decision to free the slaves he personally owned in his will, a rare act among Virginia planters, but also notes the limitations. He could not free the Breer dower slaves belonging to Martha Breer's estate. This act is presented as both a moral gesture and a reflection of Washington's inability to fully confront the institution during his lifetime. Chernow's treatment of slavery is neither apologetic nor anachronistically condemnatory. He presents Washington's evolution as genuine but incomplete, and frames his ambivalence as a central flaw, one that mirrored the nation's own founding contradictions. Personal ambition. Chernow traces Washington's ambition to his youth, emphasizing his sense of social inferiority and his relentless drive to rise in colonial society. Washington's family was not wealthy or well-connected, and Chernow shows how this fueled his desire for status, land, and recognition. His marriage to Martha Custis is depicted as both a love match and a strategic alliance. Chernow is careful to show that Washington's ambition was balanced by an equally powerful sense of restraint and duty. Washington was acutely aware of his public image and the precedents he set, often sublimating personal ambition for the greater good, most notably in his voluntary relinquishment of power after the Revolution, and again after 2 presidential terms. Chernow does not idealize Washington's ambition. He notes that Washington could be calculating, image-conscious, and at times obsessed with his reputation. Yet, Washington's self-awareness of his own flaws His lack of formal education, his temper, his social anxieties became, in Chernow's telling, a source of strength, driving him to self-improvement and careful leadership. 3. Chernow's use of new sources and perspectives. Exploiting the expanded Washington Papers. Chernow. S. biography is notable for being one of the first major single-volume works to fully exploit the expanded and digitized Washington Papers, made available by the University of Virginia's Washington Papers Project. This project included both Washington's own writings and letters sent to him, providing a much more complete picture of his relationships, reputation, and the context in which he operated. The digital edition allowed Chernow to search and cross-reference Washington U.S. writings and correspondence in ways that were not possible for earlier biographers, enabling him to uncover nuances, contradictions, and patterns in Washington's thinking and behavior. Integration of letters written to Washington. A significant innovation was the inclusion of letters written to Washington, not just those written by him. This allowed Chernow to draw on the perspectives of Washington's contemporaries, offering a more nuanced and complete portrait than earlier biographers who focused primarily on Washington's own words, recent scholarship, and secondary sources. Chernow also benefited from the explosion of specialized monographs and studies on every aspect of Washington's life: his political philosophy, private life, views on slavery, and more. These works, often based on newly available archival material, informed Chernow's synthesis and interpretation. No discovery of unpublished documents, but comprehensive synthesis. There is no evidence that Chernow discovered entirely unpublished or unknown Washington documents. Rather, his innovation was in the comprehensiveness and depth with which he mined the now available corpus of Washington OS papers, especially as digitized and expanded by the University of Virginia Project 4. Chernow's interpretive approach in context. Chernow's interpretive lens is psychological and empathetic, focusing on the evolution of Washington's character over time. He seeks to humanize Washington, exploring both his virtues and his flaws, and to situate him within the broader currents of his time. Chernow's narrative style is engaging and accessible, appealing to both general readers and scholars, and is recognized for its ability to make Washington live as a complex, conflicted, and ultimately human figure. Compared to earlier biographers, Chernow's work stands out for its psychological depth, narrative flair, and willingness to confront the contradictions of Washington's life. He builds on the work of earlier scholars, but surpasses them in making Washington accessible and relatable to modern readers, while still maintaining scholarly rigor. Conclusion. Ron Chernow's Washington. A life is distinguished by its psychological realism, narrative energy, and balanced assessment of Washington's virtues and flaws. Chernow's interpretive lens foregrounds Washington's ambition, restraint, and stoicism, while also confronting his flaws and contradictions, especially regarding slavery and personal ambition. By fully exploiting new sources and perspectives, Chernow offers a nuanced, humanized, and comprehensive portrait of America's first president, setting a new standard for single-volume biographies of Washington. The Myth and the Man. Washington in American Memory. George Washington occupies a unique place in American history, not only as the nation's first president and military leader, but also as a figure whose image has been shaped and reshaped by myth-making and national memory. Washington in American Memory. After his death in 1799, Washington's reputation quickly transcended the historical record, becoming a symbol of national unity and virtue. Over the 19th century, both American and European popular culture elaborated on Washington's persona, adapting it for patriotic and sentimental purposes. Artists, writers, and politicians contributed to this process, using Washington's image to promote ideals of honesty, leadership, and self-sacrifice. Stories, such as the famous cherry tree myth, crafted by Mason Locke Weems, portrayed Washington as the embodiment of moral perfection, suggesting that his public greatness was rooted in private virtue. These tales were intended to present Washington as the perfect role model, especially for young Americans. The difference between the historical figure and the national legend. The gap between the real Washington and the legendary figure is significant. Historians have long noted that few figures in American history are so difficult to assess as Washington, precisely because of the layers of myth that have accumulated around him. During his lifetime, and especially after his death, admirers sought to perfect his image, and later generations even sought to deify him. The historical Washington was a complex, sometimes contradictory man, ambitious, reserved, and capable of both great leadership and personal struggle. Myths, however, often smoothed over these complexities, presenting him as infallible and almost superhuman. This process of myth-making served important cultural purposes, helping to unify a young nation and provide a shared set of values. Modern scholarship, drawing on a broader range of sources and perspectives, continues to peel back the layers of legend to reveal a more nuanced human Washington, one whose real achievements and flaws are in many ways more inspiring than the myths themselves. In summary, Washington's transformation from man to myth reflects both the needs of American society and the enduring power of his legacy. The national legend, while powerful, often obscures the fascinating complexities of the historical figure who helped shape a nation. Conclusion. Enduring lessons from Washington's life and leadership. George Washington's life offers timeless lessons in leadership, character, and civic virtue, integrity and duty. Washington consistently placed the good of the country above personal gain, demonstrating integrity even when power was within his grasp. Resilience in adversity. From the trials of Valley Forge to the uncertainties of nation-building, his perseverance inspired those around him and proved essential to American success. Respect for civilian authority. By resigning his military commission and voluntarily stepping down after 2 presidential terms, Washington established crucial precedents for the peaceful transfer of power, an example that continues to shape democratic norms. Ability to unite. Washington's leadership was marked by a rare ability to unify diverse interests, foster collaboration, and maintain focus on shared goals, even in times of deep division. Through these qualities, Washington became not only a founding father, but a model of public service and self-restraint. Chernow's contribution to our understanding of Washington. Ron Chernow's biography, Washington: A Life, revitalized modern appreciation for the man behind the myth, depth and humanity. Chernow's work draws on a vast range of sources to present Washington as a complex, evolving individual, not just a remote icon, but a man shaped by ambition, insecurities, and growth. Balanced perspective. The biography explores both Washington's strengths and his flaws, humanizing him without diminishing his accomplishments. Demythologizing. By peeling away layers of legend, Chernow helps readers see Washington's real struggles with leadership, relationships, and a changing nation, making his achievements all the more remarkable. Lasting influence. Chernow's portrait invites us to appreciate Washington not just as a marble man, but as a leader whose enduring example remains relevant for today's challenges. In essence, Washington's legacy is a testament to the power of character and principle in shaping history. Thanks to Chernow's scholarship, we can understand the full measure of Washington's humanity and draw inspiration from both his greatness and his imperfections.